Soul Work and Soul Care, Two of Tozer's Tools, by Isaiah A. Swain and Hank Voss. No one presumes to teach an art until he has first carefully studied it. Look how foolish it is for the inexperienced to assume pastoral authority, since the care of souls is the art of arts. Gregory the Great, circa 590. Your leaders keep watch over your souls and will give an account for their work. Hebrews 13:17. Each Sacred Roots spiritual classic has a soul work and soul care resource to illustrate how Christian leaders across cultures and generations have found a particular spiritual classic helpful in pastoral ministry. Soul work includes the personal work of watering, weeding, pruning, and fertilizing the garden of one's own soul. In a similar way, soul care involves the pastoral work of nurturing growth in another's friendship with God. When Jesus discusses soul work and soul care, he often uses metaphors from the medical and agricultural professions. Like a doctor for souls, or a farmer caring for an orchard of spiritual fruit trees, congregational leaders who hope to tend souls can learn much from the wisdom of those who have gone before us. Contemplative prayer. Everything we do in God's church has to be done by prayer. A.W. Tozer. To properly describe A.W. Tozer's dedication to and depth of prayer, it is worth quoting biographer Lyle Dorset at length. Read this description of Tozer slowly, imagining you are one of his co-workers who happens upon him during one of his extended moments of prayer. Although Tozer never boasted about his devotional habits, those few who knew him well knew that the angular man with little formal schooling learned much about his Lord and his God in the secret place. Tozer spent incalculable hours in prayer. Most of his prolonged prayer time, with his Bible and hymnals as his only companions, took place in his church office on the back side of the second floor. He would carefully hang up his suit trousers and don his sweater and raggedy old prayer pants and sit for a while on his ancient office couch. After a time, his spirit would drift into another realm. In time, he would abandon the couch, get on his knees, and eventually lie face down on the floor, singing praises to the Lion of the tribe of Judah. No one presumed to interrupt these times of intimacy between A.W. Tozer and the lover of his soul. But occasionally, one of the men closest to him would climb the steps to his office and chance to see him on the couch or floor, totally oblivious to the world. Francis Chase, Harry Verploe, and Tozer's assistant pastor, Ray McAfee, all saw him at one time or another in one of those postures, and more than one of them mentioned that Tozer was weeping or moaning face down in the old carpet. As you read Dorset's description of Tozer putting on his sweater and prayer pants, sitting silently in prayer, and eventually being moved to lie face down singing praises to God, what feelings do you sense in your heart? Do you sense a desire to experience the manifestation of the presence of God like Tozer did? Are you content with your prayer life, or do you yearn to dwell deeper in God's love? Why contemplative prayer? Contemplative prayer is a practice of the church aimed at helping disciples of Jesus consciously commune with God. Since the presence of God brings fullness of joy, Psalms 16:11, 21:6, John 15:11, disciples ought to set their highest desires on abiding continually in the conscious presence of God. Psalms 27:4, Luke 10:41 and 42. Philosopher J.P. Moreland identifies two purposes for contemplative prayer. First, it helps us attach emotionally and intimately to our loving God. To love God with all our hearts, to seek God for His own sake, even if we do not experience something. Second, contemplative prayer helps us transform our character by learning to center and calm ourselves, to focus without distraction on a member of the Trinity or on God in general, to see our anxiety depart and be replaced by peace and joy. Contemplative prayer involves deep, fully focused openness to and concentration on God. That has been shown to change neural pathways in our brains, rewiring our anxious hearts towards peace and joy. In sum, contemplative prayer guides us into a deeper knowledge, experience, and understanding of the love of God. Why is contemplative prayer especially needed at this particular moment in church history? At least three reasons arise. First, we live in an age of distraction. Materialistic distractions abound unlike any previous generation. The glitter of commercialism shines bright in our magazines, on our billboards, and on our screens. Sexual distractions abound unlike any previous generation. Rates of sexual addiction have skyrocketed since the internet was made small enough to fit in our pockets. Sex is idolized and made to exist for cheap, personal pleasure, outside of God's purposes and design. Digital distractions abound unlike any previous generation. The invention of the smartphone has put encyclopedic knowledge at our fingertips and limitless entertainment before our eyes. Laptops, tablets, and smartphones alone have given us the power to ceaselessly distract ourselves. In such an age of distraction, we need to gather ourselves to God, present ourselves as living sacrifices, Romans 12:1, and dwell on His presence. Second, we live in an age of business. The worth of a person is unduly found in a person's productivity, how much they can accomplish in a work week. Articles of CEOs' morning routines and blogs of productivity-increasing diets urge readers to emulate those who are successful by corporate standards. The underlying belief is, we are what we accomplish. Hand in hand with this falsehood is the belief our wealth determines our worth. The worth of a person is not only found in one's productivity, but also in how much one is compensated for their productivity. We wrongly associate greater wealth with greater worth. Coming before God in contemplative prayer reminds us of our true worth in Jesus Christ as God's adopted sons. Ephesians 1:5. Third, we live in a secular age. We can easily run through our modern lives unaware of God's presence and unattuned to His personal work in our lives and corporate work in our churches and communities. Contemplative prayer helps us slow down and walk with God. It provides an opportunity for us to meet with God in our frenzied lives. Some of us need contemplative prayer more than others. Those of us who are emotionally stuck, depressed, or unable to express emotions may benefit greatly from contemplative prayer. Additionally, men in particular may struggle with identifying their emotions due to cultural norms that fall short of God's intention for human flourishing. Practicing contemplative prayer. Step 1. Stop. Find a still, safe spot. Psalms 46:10. Oftentimes, our minds and hearts are going so fast, we feel like we cannot stop. When we do stop, we can recognize that we are the ones being sought. God is the seeker, and we respond. John 15:16. Choose a place where you can form a habit of contemplative prayer. It should be still, safe, and the same spot to minimize distractions and help you engage with God's presence. Set a timer so that you do not have to worry about time. Start with 10 or 15 minutes, adding time as you practice. Sit in silence, focusing your attention on God. Recall His gifts with gratitude. Should distracting thoughts arise, write them down on a notepad to return to them later, and refocus. Tozer advises, it is best that we get alone, preferably with our Bible outspread before us. Then, if we will, we may draw near to God and begin to hear Him speak to us in our hearts. Step 2. Settle. Check your brain, chest, stomach, jaw, and any other places your body manifests stress. Speak scriptural truth to these specific places in your body. Allow core scriptures to form your core self and transform you into greater conformity to Christ. Psalms 131, verse 2. Like Tozer, shift our interest from the seen to the unseen. One tool to help us identify what is going on inside of us is a body scan. A body scan is when we consciously think about each part of our body and what we are experiencing in it. The psalmists were experts at body scans. Another tool is Ruler, developed by Mark Brackett. Ruler stands for recognize, understand, label, express, and regulate. Naming our emotions using the first 3 steps of Ruler can be especially helpful in settling our bodies. Once aware of what is taking place in our bodies, we are ready to invite Jesus to speak His peace to those parts of our bodies where stress or emotions are present. Matthew 11:28-30. John 14:27. Imagine Jesus laying His hands on your head, on your chest, or wherever you feel worried or stuck. Imagine Jesus speaking the word peace to that place. Pause and be still. Psalms 46:10. Step 3. Speak. Tell God your needs. Philippians 4:6-7. Do not try listing all your problems, but express just a few main worries. Release your needs to God, who provides for all our needs. Matthew 6:25-34. Give your stressors, needs, and worries over to God because He cares for you. 1 Peter 5:7. Step 4. Surrender. Now that you have given your needs over to God, give yourself over to Him. Psalm 27:4. Abide in God's love. John 15:9. Moreland says, it is time to open my heart to God and love Him from my heart, to seek to connect with Him, and to put myself in a place of waiting and anticipation for the Lord to make Himself real to me or speak to me if He chooses. As I wait, I seek to maintain my gaze on God, being aware that He maintains His gaze on me, whether or not I experience it. Those who choose to engage in contemplative prayer like Tozer want to taste, to touch with their hearts, to see with their inner eyes the wonder that is God. But do not be discouraged if you do not feel anything. Remember, the presence and the manifestation of the presence are not the same. There can be one without the other. God is here when we are wholly unaware of it. He is manifest only when and as we are aware of His presence. On our part, there must be surrender to the Spirit of God. For His work it is to show us the Father and the Son. And if we cooperate with Him in loving obedience, God will manifest Himself to us, and that manifestation will be the difference between a nominal Christian life and a life radiant with the light of His face. Reading spiritual classics. A.W. Tozer grew up poor, without the opportunity to complete high school. While working in a tire factory, he heard the good news about Jesus, repented, and believed. At 19, he began to preach, becoming one of the most influential pastors in his generation. His books, The Pursuit of God and The Knowledge of the Holy, have helped millions know and love the triune God revealed in Scripture. When asked how he learned to read the Scripture with such clarity and theological depth, Tozer would point to his friends and teachers, a list of some 35 Christian spiritual classics Tozer read and reread throughout his life. Tozer was well read in Christian spiritual classics. In an unpublished letter to William Peterson, dated December 14, 1959, Tozer agreed to list a few classics that every educated Christian should read. This list of 35 Christian spiritual classics is recorded in Table 1. In addition to his list of 35, Tozer noted in his Alliance Weekly editorial for March 21, 1956, that a number of great mystical classics have been republished recently, in which he mentioned William Law and Jacob Boehme among the great names. In his book, The Divine Conquest, Tozer lists the writers who were most helpful and formative for him. This all-star list is listed in Table 2, and all of them are included in his larger list of 35, except for the relatively unknown John Smith, 1616 to 1652. Tozer's 35 Teachers. Adornment of the Spiritual Marriage, Jan van Rieselbrock. Amendment of Life, Richard Rolle. Ascent of Mount Carmel, John of the Cross. The Ascent of Mount Zion, Bernardino de Laredo. A Little Book of Eternal Wisdom, Henry Suso. Centuries of Meditations, Thomas Trenet. Christian Perfection, Francois Fenelon. The Cloud of Unknowing, Anonymous. Confessions, Augustine of Hippo. Dark Night of the Soul, John of the Cross. The Goad of Love, Walter Hilton. A Guide to True Peace, Francois Fenelon, Madame Guyon, and Miguel Mologne. Hymns, Gerhard Tangstein. The Imitation of Christ, Thomas à Kempis. Introduction to a Devout Life, Francis de Sales. Letters of Direction, Henry de Tourville. On the Incarnation, Athanasius of Alexandria. On the Love of God, Bernard of Clairvaux. Poems, Frederick Faber. Poems, by Isaac Watts. The Practice of the Presence of God, by Brother Lawrence. Private Devotions, by Lancelot Andrus. Proselygium, by Anselm of Canterbury. The Quiet Way, by Gerhard Tersteegen. Revelations of Divine Love, Julian of Norwich. The Scale of Perfection, by Walter Hilton. Sermons, by John Tauler. Song of Songs, by Bernard of Clairvaux. The Spiritual Combat, Lorenzo Scupoli. The Spiritual Guide, Miguel de Molonos. Talks of Instruction, Meister Eckhart. A Testament of Devotion, by Thomas Kelly. Theologia Germanica, Anonymous. The Vision of God, Nicholas of Cusa. The Way of Christ, Jacob Bohemi. Tozer's all-star list include Brother Lawrence, Meister Eckhart, Frederick Faber, Francois Fenelon, and Nicholas of Cusa. What is a Christian spiritual classic? In the same letter in which Tozer gave his famous list of 35, he suggested one criterion for defining Christian spiritual classic. It takes more than 50 years to prove a book. Sacred Roots adopts this criterion and further defines Christian spiritual classic as a non-canonical text attested to across centuries and cultures as helpful for soul work and soul care. A text is non-canonical insofar as it is not Christian scripture, not one of the books of the Old or New Testament. Spiritual classics may be any kind of text, whether a book, letter, journal, autobiography, or otherwise. A text is attested to across centuries if it has continued to endure the test of time since its publication. Like Tozer, Sacred Roots considers a book qualified for consideration as a spiritual classic after 50 years. Being attested to across cultures means the spiritual classic has a wide geographical reach, not only being helpful for a specific culture, but being widely read and utilized across cultural lines. Finally, Christian spiritual classics are helpful for soul work and soul care, as they aid the personal work of watering, weeding, pruning, and fertilizing the garden of one's own soul, and the pastoral work of nurturing growth in another's friendship with God. Spiritual classics and soul work. Spiritual classics give us a wider and deeper vision of the Christian life. Tozer urges us to come near to the holy men and women of the past, so that we can feel the heat of their desire after God. Reading the Christian spiritual classics brings us near to faithful and fruitful believers from centuries past and exposes us to their desire for God. They can become models for us, calling out to us, "Be imitators of me as I am of Christ." 1 Corinthians 11:1. And as we examine their lives and teachings in their own context, we can learn how to increase our faithfulness and fruitfulness as we surrender to the Spirit's work in our hearts. We may notice new ways of loving God and loving neighbor. We may have hidden sins brought to light in our hearts as the spiritual classic puts words to something within us which was previously unacknowledged. Spiritual classics help us read Scripture with greater clarity. Tozer suggests we could gain much from a little acquaintance with men and women of Nicholas of Cusa's spiritual flavor and the school of Christian thought which they represent. The newest school of Christian thought is not automatically the best one. Such a perspective, while all too common in our contemporary world, is, as C.S. Lewis puts it, chronologically snobbish. We too frequently place our postmodern assumptions and ideas on a high pedestal at the expense of all other opinions and perceptions from across church history. This results in a reading of Scripture that is disjointed from the past 2,000 years of God's activity in the world and ignores the voices of the majority of Christians. Through Christian spiritual classics, we can give Nicholas of Cusa, Benedict of Nursia, or Athanasius of Alexandria a seat at the theological table. We can compare and contrast our observations of the Scriptures with those of John Woolman, Phoebe Palmer, or Howard Thurman. When we have a question, we can discuss with John Calvin or ask Thomas Aquinas' opinion. Their collective years of prayer, study, and discernment are available to us in their spiritual classics and can help us interpret Scripture. Like Scripture, spiritual classics should be read slowly and devotionally. Just as the psalmist advises us to meditate on God's law, Psalms 1, verse 2, so also we should meditate on, mull over, and carefully read spiritual classics. Devotionally reading spiritual classics can be an effective tool for spiritual formation as we apprentice ourselves to the authors. When we begin viewing spiritual classics as opportunities for mentorship rather than for study, they will begin to speak to our hearts in addition to our minds. Spiritual classics should be read both critically and charitably. Everything we read in a spiritual classic should be tested by the words of Scripture, so that we do not blindly heed every piece of advice offered by an author. Spiritual classics are not written by God, but by fallen human beings. While much of what they write can be helpful, they certainly may have errors. This is why we must meditate on Scriptures just as much as, if not more than, we read spiritual classics. Yet when we do find something to criticize in a spiritual classic, we must not reject the classic or the author completely. We must read both critically and charitably, lest we throw the baby out with the bathwater. Reading a spiritual classic is like eating ribs. We eat the meat, but leave the bones. 1 Thessalonians 5, 19 through 21. We should thankfully receive the spiritual nutrients available to us in the classic without digesting the harmful toxins of unbiblical teaching. The key to discerning the difference is a growing knowledge of the Scriptures and personal conformity to the character of Christ. Lastly, reading spiritual classics is similar to choosing our friends. While Christians are commanded to love all people, we all have specific people whom we consider our friends. Friendship may be formed around similar interests, similar life experiences, or when we just click with another person. No one can be friends with everyone. Similarly, as we read spiritual classics, we will find ourselves connecting with some authors or classics and not with others. We will click with some of them on a deeper level than others. This is normal, and when we find spiritual classics that edify us, we should spend extra time with them. Just like our friendships are deepened when we spend time with one another, so our devotional life will be deepened by spending extended time with these spiritual classics. Spiritual classics and soul care. My wife and I moved to Dayton, Ohio a few years ago, and I love the community we have here. I am a relatively capable do-it-yourselfer who likes to complete all my own home repairs and home improvement projects. Sometimes the project required is above my level of experience, like when my foot fell through our ceiling and made a hole above our furnace. To fix the ceiling, we needed to take apart pieces of the furnace. I did not feel comfortable doing that job on my own. So one of my friends, who has much repair experience, helped me and taught me how to fix the ceiling. I was, and remain, very thankful for his help. Spiritual classics are the same way. When a brother or sister comes to us with a need for soul care, with pieces of their heart that need fixing or areas for improvement in their souls, we may need expert assistance. We can point them to a soul improvement expert like John Owen or Augustine. Spiritual classics can be tools in our toolbox that we lend out to those needing a spiritual repair. We might also think about spiritual classics as a pharmacy for soul care. As we explore a breadth of spiritual classics, we notice which ones are antidotes for specific soul sicknesses. For example, James Houston recognizes Julian of Norwich's revelations of divine love as an effective soul medicine for victims of sexual abuse. Additionally, C.S. Lewis was well known for recommending specific spiritual classics to individuals who wrote to him with questions about Christian theology and spirituality. Prescribing spiritual classics to others can be an effective way to encourage their spiritual formation, but requires an adequate knowledge of both the person and the spiritual classic. Thus, reading spiritual classics performs a double duty of supplementing personal soul work and informing pastoral soul care, both forming us into better ministers and improving how we minister.